We'll wait just a minute to begin as our attendees enter the meeting. Okay, well, it looks like we have critical mass. Good morning and welcome to today's meeting of our City Council SCAP Ad Hoc Committee. I'm Brad Eggleston, Director of Public Works for Palo Alto. Just some logistics, we are recording this meeting and it will be posted to the city's website. We'll send out a link to you following the meeting, and we're also streaming the meeting live on YouTube today. You'll be able to ask questions or make comments in the Zoom Q&A function during the meeting. Our staff team will try to answer those questions during the meeting. If there are any we can't get to, we'll keep track of them and be sure to find a way to answer them for you later. Next slide. Well, there's the Q&A just to show you where that is in Zoom, circled there. Next slide. So this is the agenda for today's meeting. We'll have a quick review of last month's ad hoc meeting that was centered on single-family residential electrification. Then we'll review electrification for buildings other than single-family residential. We'll talk about permitting for building electrification and some of the challenges with permitting and the actions and responses that are underway. And then we'll talk about the funding and resources allocated to the SCAP effort in the near term. We will pause at a couple points along the way for questions and comments from the committee members, but we'll have an opportunity after the staff presentation on these topics for public comment. And we will try to find a time to take a break somewhere in the middle of this. So again, kind of like last time, reflecting the multi-departmental nature of the SCAP effort, we will have multiple members of the staff team from various departments making the presentation. But I'd now like to turn it over to our sustainability manager, Christine Wong.
Thanks, Brad. Good morning, everyone. So I wanted to provide a very quick recap of what we heard at the last SCAP ad hoc meeting. Our last meeting was focused on residential building electrification, and we got feedback both during the meeting as well as after the meeting from people who viewed the webinar after the fact. And we posed a couple questions and heard feedback around the top barriers to residential building electrification. The number one barrier that came up many, many times was the cost of conversion. So that is something that we are trying to figure out how to address with the SCAP update. And another thing that we heard a lot is that more outreach is necessary, and a suggestion to do a group buy program for electric appliances. So all those suggestions are things that we are looking into. Other things that we asked feedback on are what are the priorities that the city should explore? And the number one priority by a large margin was to reduce upfront costs. That was something that came up many times and was pretty much the number one priority for almost everyone who responded. So we're going to take a look at all of the feedback from participants. And as a reminder, the meeting recording from the September webinar, as well as the PowerPoint presentation and a summary of the questions and answers are on the sustainability section of the City of Palo Alto website. And at the September ad hoc meeting, one of the suggested priorities for the city to explore was to pursue multifamily building electrification. So we decided to add a little information on that to today's presentation. So with that, I'm going to turn the discussion over to Lisa Benatar, who is the manager of the Utilities Program Services, and she's going to provide a brief overview of multifamily building electrification.
Great. Thank you, Christine. Hi, I'm Lisa Benatar, manager of the Utilities Program Services Group. As Christine mentioned and Brad mentioned, the main topics of today's meeting are commercial building electrification and permitting, as well as funding and resources. But a question did also come up about challenges to building electrification, specifically for the multifamily sector. So we wanted to take a few minutes in the beginning here to cover some slides on those, on that topic. And this first slide shows some photos. The photos on the left, these are examples of building electrification in the multifamily sector. The photos on the left show Page Mill Court, where we have a pilot program going on right now. We're replacing gas wall furnaces in low-income housing with efficient electric equipment, and I'll be talking a little bit more about that in a few minutes. The photos on the right show 430 Forest. These are some all-electric apartments. They're really nice. It's an all-new build. It was completed in 2018. The property owner was very motivated by sustainability. Some of us had the opportunity to visit a couple of years ago. So I can say from firsthand experience, they're really nice. Next slide. This slide shows natural gas use by sector, and I thought that would be helpful for us to get an idea of the contribution to natural gas use from the multifamily sector. You can see the middle circle shows of the total gas use in Palo Alto. You can see from the dark blue portion that the residential sector accounts for about 45% of consumption, and the non-residential for the other 55%. And then you can see from the outer ring, the light blue portion, single family households of the residential consumption. Single family accounts for about 2/3 and multifamily for about 1/3. So that's some helpful background. Another number that's helpful to know is that there are about roughly 26,000 households in Palo Alto, and about 11,000 of those are multifamily. The other roughly 15,000 are single family. And of those 11,000 multifamily households, about 80% are occupied by renters. So that's an important number. That percentage is an important distinction between single family and multifamily sectors, because for the single family sector, that percentage is roughly flipped. About 80% of single family homes are occupied by owners. And we'll see that high percentage of rentals for the multifamily sector ties in with some of the challenges that we'll see. Next slide. So I would say the challenges to building electrification in the multifamily sector are actually very similar to those for the single family sector, as Christine Wong mentioned. Cost. I think Sherry Lisgarten mentioned last time, cost. It's a lot. That's one of the biggest issues. But there are also issues around the need for electrical upgrades, issues around permitting, just general awareness of electrification. Both from the viewpoint of the tenants and the property owners. Those challenges all kind of overlap with the single family sector. But for the multifamily sector, because such a high percentage of the households are rentals, we see some additional challenges listed here in these bottom 3 bullets. One of them we refer to often as split incentives. That's when the investor doesn't experience directly the benefits of the investment. An example of that would be, for example, when I mentioned on the first slide that we're doing some gas wall furnace replacements. Those gas wall furnaces are in the living space. They're not a furnace off in a storage room or a basement or garage or something. They're in the living space. They're burning methane. There are combustion gases, sometimes even methane leaks. And so that can really have an impact on indoor air quality. So when we replace those gas furnaces with electric equipment, we see an improvement in indoor air quality. And we also have an additional benefit, which is that electric equipment can offer cooling in the summer in addition to heating in the winter. And so we see some benefits to comfort. But the investors, the property owners, don't directly experience those benefits themselves. So again, we refer to that as a split incentive. We also see that oftentimes multifamily property owners don't want to bother their tenants. They don't want to engage in construction projects that are going to be happening in the units. So that's a problem. And we also have heard from multifamily property owners that they prefer to keep equipment uniform across all of their properties. It makes it easier for them in terms of maintenance. It's more straightforward. So all of these challenges just sort of pile on top of the other ones that are more overlapping with the single family sector. Next slide. So our approach to addressing challenges that overlap with the single family sector challenges is really similar to our approach for that sector. For the high upfront cost, we're going to offer incentives for the customers. Christine Tam will be talking a little bit about that in her presentation. We'll be soon rolling out some rebates for business customers, and those will include rebates for space and water heating equipment. We're looking forward to rolling those out, and multifamily property owners will be eligible for those rebates. And to address issues related to electrical upgrades and permitting, we'll be offering technical assistance services and project guidance similar to what we do for the single family sector. We're actually in the last stages of the vendor selection process for an RFP that we issued this summer. We're going to have whatever vendors we select for the multifamily sector, they will be providing these services of technical assistance and project guidance. And they'll also be able to reach out directly to multifamily property owners and discuss our programs and incentives, some of the benefits of electrification, things like that. And then for outreach to tenants, we'll be continuing our internal Marcom efforts through channels like our e-newsletters and bill inserts and social media campaigns. And next slide. So for the challenges that are these three that are more directly related to the multifamily sector, honestly, they can make things, it's a tough nut to crack, this sector. And we've seen that with even our existing program, Multifamily Plus, which is for installing efficiency upgrades. This is a direct install program. This is why this is a direct install program, which means that we cover all of the cost of the programs. There's no cost to the customer. And we still can sometimes have a hard time getting customers to participate. Typically, we see the most uptake for things like lighting upgrades in common areas, because those are pretty straightforward projects, and property owners actually do see direct benefits in terms of reductions to their utility bill. So it's challenging, and I will say that our approach has been to kind of try to put ourselves in the mind of the property owners and think, when would property owners be the most receptive or inclined to think about equipment replacement, the most motivated? And this is, again, similar to the single family sector. There are two main situations. One overlaps, one doesn't. And next slide. The first situation is when they would need to replace equipment anyway. When equipment is old, reaching the end of its useful life, what we really want to avoid is replacing old gas equipment with new gas equipment that's going to be around for another 20 years. So we want to try to catch the property owners at the point when, they often have equipment replacement cycles that they go by, and we want to catch them in that cycle, intercept them at that point. And as I mentioned, we're just on the precipice of hiring some vendors to help us with this sector. And one of the first things we're going to want to do is have them work with us to inventory the existing location and age of existing gas equipment, so that we can have that information, and then we can target property owners to reach out to where we see that there is likely old equipment that's just about ready to get replaced. And then these vendors will, again, have conversations about the benefits of electrification, tell them about our programs and incentives, things like that, and hopefully we'll get some uptake. But again, this can still be a hard sell. We realize that. So our plan is to first focus on projects that offer multiple benefits to customers, where we will cover most, if not all, of the costs. This would be, for example, again, projects replacing space heating equipment in low-income housing, because again, we would cover the bulk of the costs there. What we really want to do is get some projects under our belt, get some equipment installed, and learn along the way. And as I mentioned on the first slide, we've got a pilot project going on in that area currently. Next slide. This slide shows some information about our pilot project. Again, it's at Page Mill Court. We're replacing 24 gas well furnaces in this low-income housing with efficient electric heat pump equipment. This location is Page Mill Court. For those of you who don't know, it's near El Camino and Page Mill. I had the opportunity to visit, and construction is underway. We had some hiccups. Again, I guess I would say we've learned a lot about permitting and planning, had some hurdles there. We also ran into some construction pauses that were caused by COVID. But again, construction's underway once again. I wanted to mention that this project is funded by the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, BOCMed. So again, the costs are completely covered. And we're excited about this project, and it's should be complete by the end of December. Okay, next slide. So when equipment is old, that's one time to try to talk to multifamily property owners about switching to electric. Another time is when they're getting pushed from their tenants. And we're starting to see this a little bit. Tenants are becoming more aware and more informed about their carbon footprint and wanting to reduce it. They may be having conversations with their landlords about gas, what gas equipment is in the building. Can we move away from gas and move towards clean electricity, that kind of thing. But what we're seeing even more of is the situations that are pictured on the two photos on the left, which is that tenants are pushing landlords to install electric vehicle charging equipment, EV charging equipment. You can see from the photo on the left that there's an electric vehicle plugged in to an extension cord because there is no charging equipment. I hope you can see there's an orange extension cord, and you can see from the middle photo that extension cord runs all along the floor for about 15 feet in front of the car and goes up into a 110 volt wall outlet. So that's not an ideal situation. And this is why tenants are asking about EV chargers. And that's really a great opportunity for property owners to take advantage of our EV technical assistance program, Evtap. This is a program that helps property owners with the process of installing EV charging equipment. That can be a complicated process. Conversations around installing charging equipment often lead to conversations about upgrading electric panels. And that's why we provide this hand-holding. And this is actually the perfect time when we're talking about panel upgrades to talk about building electrification. It's that entry point where we can say, hey, what gas equipment do you have in your building? You want to kind of future-proof your electric panel and think about upgrading it to handle other electric equipment as well. So that's a good time to talk to property owners also about building electrification. But we realize that there are still plenty of challenges. You can see one of them on this photo on the right. That photo shows a bank of electric meters located very close to gas meters. The electric meters are on top, the gas meters are on the bottom. And this situation is unfortunately pretty common in multifamily buildings because it's common in older buildings, and they're often older, built in the 1950s, 60s, that kind of thing. And this location of electric meters so close to gas meters does not meet code anymore. Code now says that electric meters need to be at least 3 feet away from gas meters. So the situation in this photo is an actual situation where a multifamily property owner wanted to install EV charging equipment and learned from our engineering department that they'd need to separate the banks of meters, and the engineering recommended relocating the gas meters. But the cost of that would be about $6,500. So again, this is a challenge, but I think it's also an opportunity for us to get creative and collaborate with engineering and think about ways to perhaps redirect some of the resources that would have gone towards, for example, moving gas equipment, and instead direct those towards electrification. Next slide. This last slide just summarizes pretty much what I've talked about, our programs and activities that we're planning for the near term, the next 1 to 3 years. I've covered most of these things. We're planning on engaging third-party vendors to provide the technical assistance and project guidance services. We're going to offer incentives. We're planning to start with projects that offer the most benefits to customers, likely in the low-income sector. We're going to continue our our direct install, no cost to customers, efficiency programs for multifamily buildings. And we'll definitely continue our technical assistance program, Evtap, for EV charging equipment. You'll be hearing more about that, I think, next month at the ad hoc committee meeting, where the topic is electric vehicles. The Evtap program, I will say, has been a great way for us to sort of initiate conversations with property owners about electrification in general. So I think that's it. Kind of went through that quickly, but that's what we have for multifamily, and I'll pass it now to my colleague Christine Wong, who's going to share about commercial building electrification. Thank you.
That's actually Christine Tam will be next.
I'm sorry, Christine Tam. You know, I purposely said the last name because I wanted to distinguish, but I knew that. Sorry about that, Christine's.
Thank you, Lisa. Hi, I'm Christine Tam. Good morning, everybody. And today I will be talking about commercial building electrification. So at the April 19th City Council meeting this year, Council directed staff to develop a plan for earlier adoption of commercial electrification retrofits. And in the next set of slides, I hope to be able to address this Council directive. I will be covering the proposed greenhouse gas emission reduction goal for non-residential buildings, some of the key challenges to electrifying energy systems in commercial buildings, and also some of the current and planned city initiatives to support voluntary electrification efforts. And when I'm referring to non-residential buildings, I am including commercial buildings, city facilities, as well as K-12 schools. So I like to start with a snapshot of non-residential buildings in Palo Alto. Based on the 2019 Santa Clara County Assessor records, there are around 2,300 parcels in Palo Alto with non-residential land use codes. Office space, followed by retail, are the top two land use for non-residential parcels. About 10% of the non-residential parcels have currently no gas connections. University South and Ventura are two neighborhoods that have the highest number of all electric commercial buildings. And there is around 29 million square feet of non-residential floor space. This includes 2 million square feet of city facilities. And 60% of the non-residential floor area is in buildings over 50,000 square feet. And I'm pointing this out because space heating and water heating systems in large multi-story commercial buildings are configured differently than the systems in small commercial buildings. And these are usually more difficult to retrofit. And the Palo Alto Unified School District occupies around 1.3 million square feet across 11 elementary schools, 3 middle schools, and 2 high schools. Next slide. You have already seen the slide earlier from Lisa's deck. There's around 28 million therms of gas used each year in Palo Alto, and that's split between 45% residential use and 55% non-residential use. Commercial facilities account for about 80% of the non-residential gas use. And as you can see in this chart, city facilities account for 8% of that non-residential gas use. And within non-residential buildings, natural gas is primarily used for space heating, which is 38%, water heating, which is about 35%, and then cooking, which is 20%. Next slide, please. So staff is currently proposing a 40% reduction in direct greenhouse gas emissions in the non-residential building sector from the 1990 baseline by 2030. And the bulk of this reduction will come from lowering natural gas use in existing buildings. To meet this goal, we are assuming that nearly all mixed-view package rooftop HVAC units will need to be electrified. Plus, all facilities over 25,000 square feet will need to cut greenhouse gas emissions by 20%. And city facilities will also cut natural gas use by 80%. In the current proposed ASCAP plan, we're still only achieving 71% greenhouse gas emissions reductions by 2030. And this is short from the 80 by 30 goal. To achieve the remaining 9% reduction, we will be doing additional evaluation of decarbonization opportunities in commercial buildings, especially in the area of water heating. Next slide, please. So who are the stakeholders? These are the building owners or the property developers, but also indirectly the building tenants. From a financial perspective, building owners are focused on minimizing costs and maintaining a healthy cash flow. And from a business perspective, they need to make sure that they meet the needs of their tenants in terms of their thermal comfort, and they also need to stay on top of the building maintenance. And from a regulatory perspective, they need to make sure that their buildings meet both state and local requirements, such as Title 24 Building Code, local fire code, etc. Next slide, please. Well, there are many challenges to non-residential building electrification. And at the top of this list, no surprise, is cost. So replacing a gas equipment with an electric alternative will almost always be more expensive than a like-for-like replacement. In the case of a rooftop package HVAC unit, a heat pump system is only about 10 to 20% more than a mixed-use system. And even though this is not much of a cost premium, a building owner would prefer going with the lowest cost system. There could be some bill savings by converting to a heat pump system, but if the utility bill is paid by tenants, the building owner will not care about the bill savings. And this is the same split incentive that Lisa talked about earlier. Most rooftop package units are rated with a 15-year expected useful life, but it is very common that these units remain in service for 20 years or even 25 years because it is cheaper to keep an old HVAC unit running than to replace it. And another challenge is that building owners rely on the contractors to recommend a replacement system when the existing equipment is no longer operable. And contractors typically replace the equipment with a tried and true product with the same specs. They prefer not taking the risk of recommending a different technology and getting blamed if it doesn't work. And this is particularly true for heat pump water heater, which has a slower recovery time for hot water. And then also the efficient operation of heat pump equipment requires space around the compressor for heat exchange. And in buildings where the water heating or the space heating equipment is located in a mechanical room, there may not be enough space for the heat pump equipment. And last but not least, operating unfamiliar equipment will involve some learning curve and training, and building owners may not want to invest the time in staff training. Next slide, please. We do have an immediate opportunity for the electrification of mixed-use package HVAC unit. We also call these gas packs. Each gas pack unit houses both a gas furnace and an AC compressor. So if you do a Google Maps satellite view of Palo Alto, you will notice that there are many commercial buildings that have gas packs on the rooftops. And this is shown in the photo on the right, actually on the left. The photo in the middle shows what these gas packs look like at the roof level. There's a nameplate on each unit that shows the date of manufacture, the refrigerant type, the heating capacity, etc. of the gas pack. And the photo on the right here shows a gas pack using R22 as refrigerant. And some of you may know that R22 is also known as Freon. And Freon has a global warming potential that is 1,800 times more potent than CO2. And the majority of gas packs built before 2010 use R22 as refrigerant. So as of January 2020, Freon is fully phased out in the United States, which means they can no longer be manufactured or imported into the United States. we are expecting that many older rooftop gas packs will need to be replaced over the next few years. And we need to make sure that these older mixed fuel systems will not be replaced with similar mixed fuel systems. So our top priority currently is to design a program and offer incentives to help building owners and contractors with replacing these gas packs with heat pump units. Next slide, please. We currently have a number of initiatives to support voluntary building electrification in commercial buildings. For new construction projects, City Council has adopted an all-electric preferred reach code for non-residential new construction projects. This reach code has been in effect since April of 2020, and it requires higher efficiency performance for new mixed-use buildings compared to all electric buildings. And since April of 2020, we have about kind of a split of 50-50 in terms of the new non-residential projects that are coming in as all electric and mixed fuel. And however, commercial new construction projects represent only about 1% or less than 1% of the building stock in Palo Alto each year. So we need to support electrification in existing buildings. We currently have a partnership with a food service consultant, and we are offering kitchen equipment demonstration to help restaurant owners select efficient and sufficient. We're helping restaurant owners select efficient electric equipment. We are also getting ready to launch a new set of commercial electrification incentives next month, and we're very excited about that. They're not actually, I think, besides SMUD, that we are not aware of any other utilities offering commercial electrification incentives. These incentives are designed to close the cost gap between the electric equipment and their gas equivalent, and therefore lowering or removing the cost barrier for end-of-life conversions. The city also currently has in place a business advantage program that offers free installation of MERV 13 filters on the rooftop HVAC units for commercial buildings. This program will start tracking the age and location of these rooftop units, so we can do targeted outreach to convert old gas packs to heat pump systems. Next slide, please. And for new initiatives, we are planning to launch a program early next year to provide technical assistance to help building owners, property managers, and HVAC contractors with electrification projects. This program will focus on gas pack conversion that I mentioned a little bit earlier. We will be engaging with our large commercial customers, including the school district, to learn about their sustainability objectives, get their feedback on the city's proposed SCAP goals, key actions and policies for non-residential buildings, and also working with them as they develop their decarbonization plan. In terms of policies, we plan to adopt an all-electric mandate for non-residential new construction projects for the building code cycle beginning in 2023. And staff will also start working on a greenhouse gas emissions benchmarking ordinance for buildings over 25,000 square feet. And for city facilities, Public Works departments will be conducting an electrification assessment at city facilities. And my colleague Murdo will be talking about this more later. The goal is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions at city facilities by 80%. Next slide, please. We know that we won't be able to meet the city's very aggressive 80 by 30 goal by only relying on voluntary electrification. So over the next few years, we will look at other policy options to serve as backstop to meeting the emissions targets. One policy option that will likely have the lowest cost impact to businesses is an end-of-life electrification mandate for targeted gas equipment such as gas packs. So staff will be studying the legal feasibility of this mandate, and we hope to work on this together with other cities that also have very aggressive decarbonization goals. We will also consider other policy options, such as using benchmarking data to establish a building emissions performance standard, a time of sale electrification mandate, and possibly also carbon pricing to drive equity between natural gas and electric price. And we do plan to have an ongoing dialogue with stakeholders to build trust and get their inputs in ongoing policy development. Next slide, please. This slide is a summary of the proposed SCAP key actions for non-residential buildings over the next 3 years. And you can use the coding on the left to cross-reference the draft SCAP 3-year work plan. I will pause here just a little bit. So, okay, let's go to the next slide. And at this point, I would like to give a shout out to a few community leaders in decarbonization. The first one is the Peninsula Conservation Center. This is a building on East Bay Shore that houses 11 environmental and nonprofit organizations, including Actera and Canopy. PCC is currently replacing all 8 of the rooftop gas packs with heat pump systems. And we've been working with PCC on this project for the last couple of months. And the next one is Zola, which is a restaurant on Bryan Street. So the owner of Zola understands the importance of decarbonization as both a commitment to protect the climate and also to improve the indoor air quality for his staff and customers. He has already upgraded the main service panels, and he's also planning to eventually replace the gas kitchen equipment with electric alternatives. So that wraps up my presentation, and I will now pass on to Murdo.
Good morning. I am Murdo Nicholson, the Infrastructure Project Manager in Public Works Engineering. And I'm pleased to announce that as part of the first citywide facility condition assessment in 10 years, all the remaining city buildings using greenhouse gases will also receive the electrification assessment, as Christine mentioned. I expect the assessment work should start in January, and we'll start seeing some results come in. Next slide, please. This is the 5 steps to reach the electrification of city facilities. 1, inventory and benchmark emissions from fossil fuel-based systems at each city facility. 2, identify energy efficient electric alternatives for fossil fuel-based systems. 3, evaluate and calculate the additional building electrical needs from the fuel switch. Develop costs for electrification year 0. And evaluate feasibility equals to generate a modified FCI. The FCI is a facility condition index. As part of the facility condition assessment, we evaluate all the buildings based off of their catch up and keep up needs. In this case, the consultant for the city will provide the FCIE, which evaluates the needs and electrification costs built in, so we can prioritize those facilities. Next slide. This chart represents both the success of work completed and the future needs of work to complete. The city has 47 of 141 buildings still using greenhouse gases. The blue line indicates the average gas therms per month from 2017 through 2019, while the orange line represents the average gas therms in 2020. We can see just how significant the reduction in therms from the water quality control plant that has already occurred with the removal of the incinerator. This used to be the city's most greenhouse gas emission producing building. Additionally, the facilities listed here from left to right represent the highest current users to the lowest users at each of those facilities. Next slide. The buildings listed here also represented on the previous chart were listed from highest to lowest in greenhouse gas use overcome to complete the electrification process. Challenges to overcome include structural constraints for replacement equipment, electrical capacity limitations, end of life of existing equipment may occur after 2030, and additional energy efficiency improvements may need to be installed in order to accommodate the full electrification simultaneously. Thank you. I look forward to reporting back to this group at the completion of the assessment. Next slide, please. We are going to take a break and pause the presentation to take questions and comments by Vice Mayor Burt and Council Member Cormick. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, staff team, for that presentation. And as Murdo mentioned, we're going to turn it back to our ad hoc committee members now for questions and comments they may have on this section of the presentation.
Go ahead, Pat. I'll go second. We'll go alphabetically.
All right, thanks. Thanks for a very informative report. I have a slew of questions, so I'll probably do some now and then others after Councilmember Cormack. So first, on the issue of retrofit of commercial buildings, there was, I think, an allusion to whether we could do mandatory retrofit upon end of life and whether there were legal barriers. And that was the first time I've heard about potential legal barriers to that. The mandatory retrofit upon end of life, I actually wanted to include in that discussion retrofit upon major remodel. So can staff provide any insights on those two aspects? First, what might be the legal barriers? And second, how much consideration has there been to retrofit upon major remodel, perhaps triggered by some prorated life of the unit, or who knows what might be the where we draw the line?
This is Brad. I'm hoping that either someone from utilities or a member of our planning team who is working on green building code items might be able to respond to that question.
So I can respond maybe to part of it. I'm not, good morning, council members. I've not been involved in conversations involving the legal aspects of the question, so I would defer that to others who may have been a part of those conversations. But the part about substantial remodel or major retrofit, that is something that we have sort of on our task list of something that we want to tackle, because we do agree that that's an area where when we do see a lot of when a property owner, commercial or otherwise, is making significant changes to a building that essentially is new construction, that's the optimal time to make sure that we're advancing our electrification interests. To do that, my understanding is that we need a cost effectiveness study to, maybe show, if not a cost effectiveness study, at least some kind of analysis to show that, it's the age of the equipment and all that kind of stuff that you've been hearing about today, which may tie into the legal constraints that you mentioned, can be addressed. So I think that's part of a larger analysis that needs to take place, and something that we're aware of and would want to include in future updates.
So I'm glad to hear that. I didn't see it in the slide deck as part of the work plan or in the white paper, and I'm not sure if all the members of the public know that these materials, I think, are now up on the SCAP website page. Is that correct, Brad?
Yes, they should be up there as of yesterday evening or this morning.
Okay, so there's a white paper that goes into a lot of really valuable detail supplementing what we've just seen in the presentation. On the cost effectiveness, I guess one of the things that I've wondered is how these kinds of upgrades might compare to something like mandatory seismic upgrades that we've been able to do in the past, and those being triggered by public health and safety, and whether climate impacts or other public health impacts would be a basis to be able to require upgrades upon either end of life or retrofit. And so I don't know if there's been a thought on, you know, the whole programs that had gone on in recent decades on mandatory seismic upgrades and how applicable those similar arguments would be here. That may not be something that staff's prepared to answer, but I'd like to get it on kind of a follow-up list if possible.
Yeah, so we'll note that. I would say that our discussions to date about green building codes and REACH codes have been centered on that approach that looks at cost effectiveness.
Yeah, and certainly that's part of the consideration, but as we encountered some time ago on seismic upgrades, there were other arguments that could be balanced, and I just think that's a useful reference point as we're moving in this new direction. Next, under the R22 Freon ban, I was really glad that staff brought that forward as an important aspect in what's likely going to be driving retrofits from that perspective, which is climate driven in two ways. It's an ozone depleting material, and it is a global warming related to that. But I really question how broadly that is yet appreciated by both the business community and residents. And so I think that could be something that we want to elevate in our education and kind of broader marketing programs on drivers for what we're trying to do. And I suspect strongly that awareness on things like that, as well as other indoor health issues, like was noted in the presentation on multifamily dwellings and the health risks from wall furnaces. I think that both of those kinds of things will be drivers for greater and more aggressive adoption of changes and retrofits. And I was glad that staff on I think it was on the commercial side, mentioned that the tenants are one of the other forces that we want to engage with. The white paper omitted that, and that was one of the things I was going to bring up, and I was glad that the presentation included that, because I think we're entering, or have already entered, the early part of a period where the values of the workforce and the values of the companies who are the tenants for commercial properties will be big drivers in adoption of change. We've tended to think historically that it would be okay if we can convince a building owner or incentivize a building owner, but their customers are the tenants, and those tenants are competing for employee attraction and retention in a very competitive regional environment. particularly among tech workers, despite the pandemic, or even in some ways because of it. The competition for talent in the tech community in the region is actually probably as high as it's ever been. And as we see that the value structure of those workers is reflective of the goals that we have here, they become a major force in driving their employers, and their employers driving the property owners to provide buildings that reflect the values on climate protection and public health that's important to them. And so I think that that's needs to become a major part of our marketing program, is appealing all the way down to the workforce and to the companies, which in many, if not most cases, have now adopted strong climate protection guiding principles and value structures and even plans. And so getting them to connect the dots between these retrofits and the plans and the values that they already have, I think is a natural fit that will complement what we can do, and maybe even be a stronger force than anything that we can do. And then last at this time, I mentioned that I was really glad to see the public health benefits included, and I took note that we have a current program that is, if I understood it correctly, pays for upgrades to MERV 13 filters. Did I understand that correctly?
Yes, you do.
And was that driven by the COVID upgrade needs, or is it funded through COVID funds, or how did that come about?
Yeah, so we were working on adding, so we've had a little bit of a lapse in our programs for small and medium businesses, and we were in the process of getting a program up and running. We had some interruption from COVID, and we realized that there are energy efficiency benefits associated with HVAC specifically, and we were able to carve out that portion of the program, get it up and running. And as part of the equipment assessment that they do up front, before they put in sensors to run the HVAC in an energy efficient way, that we were able to incorporate the option to put in a MERV 13 or similar similar filter.
Yeah,
Great. And I'm sorry, go ahead, Brett.
Oh, thanks. I was just going to add, this was part of the community and economic recovery program and work plan by staff. If you'll recall from earlier this year, the focused business support area. This is one of those endeavors that kind of dovetailed partially with an existing utilities program.
Excellent. And as I think many people, but perhaps not most, know that the MERV 13 filters have multiple benefits, not only that they reduce viral spread, and in this current circumstance are very beneficial to indoor air quality for COVID prevention, but they also have a very significant impact on other indoor air quality, including particulates, and specifically today, the most years, the month that we have significant smoke in our region. This year we had wind directions that benefited us, and we didn't get the worst of that smoke, but that's now part of our norm, and that's a climate impact as well. And so connecting those dots, that the indoor air quality upgrade is a very significant worker health impact, and for the multifamily residential, for resident health, I think is something that appeals in a way that very much supports and complements the environmental impacts that we're, and I should say climate protection impacts, because to the degree that we're seeing degradation in air quality from smoke, that's already a very significant climate impact that we are experiencing today. And I challenge anyone to think that this is as bad as it's going to get. We've seen the last half dozen years a whole step increase in mega fires, and we're adjusting to that reality. But I don't know that we're yet adjusting toward an anticipation that it will in all likelihood be worse, because there's no basis for us to assume that barring significant changes to forestry practices and the climate degradation, that it will be anything other than worse in the coming years and decades. And lastly, connected with that indoor air quality, the MERV upgrade to MERV 13 is very valuable. Upgrade to HEPA is even more so. And so I would like to recommend that we look at an integration as we're looking at new both multifamily and commercial HVAC systems, that we look at the opportunities for upgrade to HEPA inline HEPA systems, and connect those dots again to our new reality in air quality, and the degree to which that is a very significant public health impact. I'll just make a note of one reference point on the degree to which this is a public health risk. Stanford and UCLA have recently done preliminary studies, and the data is still trying to be compiled. But last year in the state, we had, I think, in the neighborhood of 20 fatalities directly from mega fires, but they estimated in the vicinity of 2,000 indirect fatalities that year alone from the smoke inhalation on people with compromised health from pulmonary disease and otherwise. 100 times as many fatalities, and that does not include the long-term health impacts and longevity impacts, and essentially fatalities in future years. It's a massive impact that has been to date grossly underappreciated by the public, and I think that it is something that we need to interconnect with the climate protection and the climate adaptation elements of this whole SCAP program. So let me turn it over to Councilmember Cormack for her questions and comments.
I'll keep mine shorter since we have about an hour and a half left in the meeting, and I know we have 2 more sections and we want the opportunity for the public to comment. Let me start as often, not always, but I do try to start this way by issuing a few compliments. And I think the thing that I liked most today was slide 21. Thanks for the photos. I was not at all sure what like a gas pack looked like. And so that was really helpful, and especially just showing the receipts. This is how people can find the information about it. So really appreciate the concrete examples. I think that always makes things more real for everyone. A few questions. Ms. Benatar, were there any other learnings from the pilot at Page Mill Court that we should be incorporating going forward? I know you mentioned a few, that there was some trouble with permitting, and I'm sure we'll get there. But was there anything else, anything that surprised the team as they did that work?
So it's in progress now. I would say surprises. So someone on our team, Scott Melberg, is the program manager directly for this program, and he has more of the day-to-day interaction with the contractors. I would say one thing that I heard about was when we do switch to electric equipment, it often involves putting some equipment on, for example, a balcony or somewhere right outside the unit, like a compressor or something like that. And while those are relatively low profile, sometimes the multifamily buildings, the outside of the building is built right up to the, I guess the setback, right? And so that would trigger then issues with planning. So I would say that was the main one that was a surprise to me. I don't know if Christine, Tam, or Scott has any additional comments there, but that's the main one that I'm familiar with. Otherwise, I mean, again, it's in-unit construction. You know, it's easier to swap out like for like, pop out the old gas furnace, put in a new one. You know, this involves putting equipment in the same location, but then running electrical out to the compressor on the balcony. So it's a little more involved.
Yeah,
but I think
okay.
I think it's going to be worth it.
For sure, but I do think it's just important when we talk about doing these things that we understand any trade-offs we're making. And if we're going to be making the trade-off that there's going to be external equipment that's visible, then let's just know that up front so people aren't surprised later. Thanks for that. Yeah. So speaking about contractors, I don't know who the right answer is, but often contractors are different for residential than for commercial. What does staff see as we're trying to convince, you know, property owners who, whether it's multifamily or commercial, to do this work? Is it the same contractors who are working in that area as they are in the residential? Is there some overlap? I'm just thinking about how we're going to do this capacity building that's so important.
I'm going to call on one of my colleagues to see if Scott or Christine can come on for that. Again, unfortunately, I'm kind of one layer removed from interacting with
anybody can answer.
Yeah, right. So I don't know. My understanding is that the contractors are typically different, but I'm not sure if
yeah, I can speak to that a little bit as well. Having experience both as a homeowner on the residential side, it does seem to be a discrete and mainly different set of contractors you call on for this work than what I see for contractors that we're using for projects at city facilities, which are commercial facilities.
That makes sense. Yeah. It means we'll need to have, you know, a two-pronged, you know, education component. So.
And I just will add just that oftentimes for multifamily anyway, we see the multifamily property owners have contractors that they prefer to work with. And so, yeah, those would definitely be different than the contractors that are typically working with single family homeowners.
Maybe we need to get their lists. Yeah, Ms. Tam, did you want to add something?
Yes, I'd like to jump in also. So most of the commercial HVAC contractors, they only work on commercial buildings. We actually have spoken at length with our counterparts at SMUD, the Sacramento Municipal Utility District, and they have launched their commercial electrification incentives about 6 months ago. They're getting some uptake, and their big takeaway is to really kind of ramp up on contractor training. But unlike SMUD, Palo Alto is a relatively small municipal utility. Our service area is small, so for us to do any effective contractor training will be difficult until kind of the surrounding service area territories around Palo Alto, until they also can join Palo Alto in increasing contractor awareness and providing contractor training. I think it will be very difficult for Palo Alto to kind of go upstream to help the contractors embrace heat pump technology. I do believe that from talking to Silicon Valley Clean Energy and Peninsula Clean Energy, they do have plans in place to ramp up on commercial electrification. So hopefully we will be able to tackle this problem of providing more contractor training.
Great, that sounds like a particularly good area for us to partner with other municipalities in the region. Last two questions are related. So I heard that we might do all electric for non-residential new construction in 2023. And the reason we can't speed that up is what? Is it back to the, you know, the cost studies?
It's the cost effectiveness studies, and feel free if anyone wants to jump in on this. and the fact that the next REACH code or green building code cycle is happening next year.
Okay.
So essentially, even if we had something on hand and we're ready to move forward with it right now, we would have to re-justify it through the 2020 code cycle for it to stay in effect when the new code comes into effect in 2023.
Okay. Just want to get that out there so everyone connects the dots on that. And, I echo what the vice mayor said about substantial remodels. We had that conversation, whether it's about residential or commercial, when we adopted these before he had returned to council. And so I know we were on the cusp of being able to do that then, and it all gets down to the definition. But I think most of us can see when someone's trying to maintain a certain status for their property and does what is a substantial, new construction remodel. So I feel like we should do that when we can. And then the end of life electrification mandate that Ms. Tam was discussing as the best opportunity. I think that was referred to in the top priority. When could we do that? I understand there was a question about the legal part, and the vice mayor talked about other potential justifications, but where is that on the schedule?
Jonathan Abendschein, can I ask you to speak to that?
Yeah, I can speak to that. I have been thinking I might be able to turn to Christine, but can you repeat the which mandate you were asking?
I'm talking about the end of life essentially for the gas packs. I'm pretty sure that's what we're getting at. When can we do that?
Yeah, so we need to talk with our attorney's office about any of the mandates that we're considering right now.
Okay.
And that includes the end of life mandate for gas packs as well. I know that there's been some efforts on those end of life mandates with other agencies. And I think, we're aware of them, but I think there is some discussion to be had with our legal department before we're ready to bring something.
Of course, but let's just get a little bit more concrete. How many of those are installed every year?
Yeah, so that's where I'd like to talk to Christine about, what sort of results something like that would produce if we could get it in place.
Okay, great. And then I'll just close with, I think we have two opportunities that leaped out at me as I reviewed the slides and looked at the white paper. And the first is, I think the gun students who came and spoke with us a few months ago can start lobbying PAUSD to get natural gas out of their own buildings. So I'll be taking a note to send them a note with the link to this. That's a good activity. And second, Coverly is the third largest user of natural gas for city buildings. So as far as I'm concerned, that's another reason to put redoing that on the list of things that need to happen. Okay, back to you, Brad. And then I think we need to get going, huh?
Well, I would like to offer the opportunity to take a 5-minute break if the committee would like. This was what we just went through was the lengthiest part of the presentation. We've got an hour and 20 minutes left. So
sure.
We'd like a break.
Let's take a 5-minute break. Let everybody stretch and the public can start thinking. Do you maybe just want to share with them how much time they're going to have and what topics we're hoping they can speak to us?
Yeah, so the upcoming topics in the presentation are about building electrification permitting. So we'll review that. And then about kind of the near-term programs and resources that are available for those. And as I said, those will be shorter presentations than our building electrification portion. So hopefully we will have time to have the committee discussion as well as the public comment. So why don't we...
I had said that I had had some additional comments, but I'll wait until our later discussion to bring those in, but I do have some additional ones.
Okay, thank you, Vice Mayor Burt. Why don't we take our break then, and we'll come back and get started at right about 10:15. Okay, well, I think we're ready for our next topic. And I'd like to turn it over to Director of Planning and Development Services, Jonathan Waite.
Great, thank you, Brad. Good morning again, ad hoc committee members. If we can go to the next slide, I think we've talked a little bit about some of this in the course of conversation and Q&A. But just to maybe start from the beginning here, our electrification policy is first principally established through state mandates. Every 3 years, the state goes through a process of updating its building, electrical, mechanical codes, et cetera, and its energy reach codes. And so we've recently have done this, and any jurisdiction can go through a process of going beyond the state, and Palo Alto has certainly done that in the past through its own local adoption program. But as we've talked about this morning, to do that, to go beyond the state, there is a cost effectiveness study that needs to be prepared. And there are opportunities for the city to join in cost effective studies that are being applied throughout the state, typically through the Public Utilities Commission. Sometimes they may not be going far enough for our interests, and we have to engage our own consultants to prepare our own cost effectiveness study. And I believe we may have done that last year when we went all with the all electrical mandate for single family and low rise multifamily. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong about that. There is a current PUC study underway for ADUs, and we're hoping that that's going to be wrapped up soon. And we anticipate coming back to the city council with some information on that in the first part of next year when we come back with some ADU changes, accessory dwelling units. So beyond the state and the local programs, of course, we have our own utility provider here in Palo Alto, and so we have a little bit more authority to or control over different incentives or even utility mandates that we might want to impose to advance our electrification interests. And as we think about that, and as we go through this process, and of course this committee is aware, is understanding our infrastructure capacity, where we're creating these incentives and opportunities. Do we have the infrastructure in place to accommodate that and support our goals there? Building readiness is an area where I think we've had some conversation this morning. This is a real critical issue, and I think one that reflects some of at least one of the commenters in the chat has identified this. It's really difficult to make that transition from a gas system to electric if you don't have, the service panel to accommodate the electrical load that would be required, or if there's spacing requirements that need to be addressed, as we saw in the one example with the gas meters and things like that. So building readiness is a real sort of challenge to, making that transition. And then, of course, there's the building permit process, which I know the ad hoc and members of the community are well aware of that. We can go to the next slide. I'll spend a moment on the permit process. Just for context, about 7% of the building permits that we process in the city are related to electrification permits, and I'm including everything in that bucket: PV, energy storage systems, and of course the heat pumps, as well as vehicle chargers. That's roughly about 300 or so permits, maybe a little less a year. And we actually have seen a pretty notable increase in electrification permits. For the past 3 years, we've been hovering around 220 permits per year. This year through September, we're already at about 320 permits. So we're definitely seeing an increase, and a notable increase in heat pumps as well. So the permit processing time is something that I know the committee is aware that I've been working on with our staff. When we issue a permit at the development center, it's an interdepartmental team consisting of a lot of review departments, including utilities and fire and planning. and Public Works. And so we are making some efforts to improve our processing times, and I can share with you some information on that. I know that that's not the focus of our conversation necessarily here. We are spending some time with the Utilities Advisory Commission. And so we have some regular updates quarterly that we're checking in with them, and we can provide some additional updates. You can see on the screen, we've made some enhancements already. There's some things that we need to do. There has been, we are making performance improvements, and there's, the data is showing that we are making headway, even though we still obviously have some things that we're sorting through, not only on the permit issuance side, but also on the inspection side that we're working on. There is some promise, though, as we've shared with the Utilities Commission about Solar App Plus, leveraging technology to help us be more efficient in our permitting process. There is a path forward for us on that. We just need to, as that software is not where it's going to, where it is today with PV is going to evolve to include energy storage systems and eventually some of these other electrification permits. We are in active conversation on those efforts to see what we can do. And it's a matter of aligning our local processes so that we can fit within that system. Can we go to the next slide, please? And I think this is my last slide before there's an opportunity for some feedback. So, it's one thing to be processing 300 or so permits a year and have some of the challenges that we've heard expressed. As we talk about scaling up an operation to 3,000 permits to meet our our end goal here, that's a tremendous load that we're going to have to figure out. And here are some things that our colleagues in utilities have started. Clearly, we all need to be involved in a sort of shared education for ourselves and helping our contractors and homeowners move along in terms of what where we're trying to go, how we can get there. There are some things that we can do in terms of our outreach, our engagement, the materials that we provide, not only on our website, but through other means, making sure that we have clear checklists, things along these lines, which we're starting now, but at the scale that we're talking about where we need to go, we really need to think a little bit differently about how we're going to accomplish this. And I think here is where an opportunity for Solar App Plus or some other technology is really something we're going to have to lean hard on, so that we can take to the extent that we can take the human sort of engagement out of the permit issuance part, which we do for water heater replacements and things like that. If we can get to that place where we can do that for electrification, we're going to be in a lot better place to assimilate that volume. We are still going to need to do inspections, and so we're going to have to talk about resource constraints at some point and how we might mitigate that. But then also, can our grid, I keep coming back to, and my colleagues in utilities can speak more to this, is at a local level with our transformers and our utility infrastructure, are we prepared to even even if we can get through the permitting process of it, how do we address those issues, those infrastructure needs as well. So I'll pause there and happy to answer questions. I think the next slide is feedback. I've got David Chung, who's our assistant building official, as well as others who are familiar with this process to help out and answer any questions that the ad hoc may have.
Thanks, Director Late. I'll jump in first this time. I'm just wondering, the slide you had that was sort of all of the improvements that you're making, I think it was maybe 2 back. Yeah, maybe that one. I wonder if your department has thought at all about, instead of sort of doing a better job of what we're doing now, but sort of like saying like, here's the turnaround time. Like this is, we want the entire, starting with that and then working backwards. I'm just, and perhaps you've already thought about it that way, but I think that kind of rethinking is helpful. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. We have recently changed. So there's a couple of things. There's a lot of layers to this, and I'll give you some. And if you want me to dive more deeply, I'm happy to do that. But the bottom line is we have established a an expected review time for a lot of our permits. And most of them range, for the residential side of things, they range from, just a few days, over the counter type of things, which today in a sort of our environment is like a 1 to 5 day sort of time frame, to a 14-day review of our permits, to first round corrections. And so we have that as a threshold, which is actually a bit of a reach for us because of resource allocations that we have, not just in our department, but also in the other departments that are reviewing these. And so we are trying to go define that time frame, and the overall permit processing time is something that we're tracking too, because it's one thing to say first corrections, but at the end of the day, you need to get the permit issued. And to your point, I think what we're trying to do is get that permit issued electronically through. Our goal is to be using Solar App to the extent that we can, so that the permit issuance piece is really just handled online and addressed that way. That's our goal, really, certainly at the residential level, to be able to do that. And I think we're going to get there. I think there's some some work we still need to do, but that's the objective: is how do we help the homeowners get the permit quickly, and not have to go through these iterative process of review.
And do we think we're 6 months away from that being a pretty straightforward system? I mean, first of all, I want to acknowledge the horrible experience some people have had and the heroic work that you and your staff are trying to do to fix it, right? So both things can be true at the same time.
Sure.
But like, what is the time frame when we can expect someone to have this new and improved experience?
Yeah, well, I think some of that is in our control, some of it's not. So right now, Solar App Plus is where we're focusing a lot of our energy. But that system in and of itself is only good for photovoltaics right now.
Right.
It does not include energy systems, which our experience is that's becoming more sort of hand in glove. If you're going to do PV, you're also going to do energy storage. And so we are working. We're having conversations with the company that supports Solar App Plus. And we're engaged at a sort of ground level discussion with the energy storage component, and we're hoping it's going to expand. We're not yet at the PV for Palo Alto yet, because we think it's a small universe, but beyond that, let's get into the system and experiment with it and make sure that let's work out the kinks as the program begins to scale up, that we're able to scale up with it. But one of the challenges that we have is again just the infrastructure component. We can do. We're in conversations with utilities now to talk about what that threshold for review can be. The app itself has, and this is where I'm going to start getting a little bit out of my my area of expertise, and I'll ask others to chime in here. But the app itself can handle 38 kilowatts per hour, and our local threshold now is only about 10. So and the reason for that, as I understand it, is that we need to make sure that the transformers and our systems are in place, the infrastructure can accommodate those increased loads, or however that system works. And so again, I've been in conversations with Dean, and I know he and his staff are looking at that to find out where there might be some opportunities to increase that threshold. And if that happens, then we're going to be able to open up that Solar App, I think, to a lot more users.
Okay. I mean, this is a whole topic in and of itself, and I know that you're working with the UAC on it. My interest and objective is to know when we can expect this to be working better and to be ready for the volume of applications that we're going to get. So much as that tempting as it is to go further in the details, I'll stop there. But I don't think I've gotten an answer as to when, but even if you don't think you can pull it off by, like, I don't know, June of next year, setting some sort of target date is going to make me and probably my colleagues and certainly the public feel better about, where we're headed. And if we don't make it, then we discuss that then. But having heard about these things for so long from, both our staff and also from people who've experienced it, I'm ready for us to have a date that we're aiming for. So
great. Yeah, that
All
sounds good. I don't have a date today, but I will tell you that we are
Okay.
getting back to the UAC in December. And for that report, we'll try to have a date set up so that we can share that with the community.
And then we work to the date. Yeah.
That's right.
Okay. All right.
Good.
Vice Mayor.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. Just wanted to follow up on some of the issues Councilmember Cormack raised and others. So as you're looking at the scale that you are seeing escalate, in particular on the electrification side, well, I guess in both, we've got the PV storage and electrification. And is your increase in permitting demand most of all on the electrification as opposed to storage and PV?
So let me just give you some numbers as I'm looking at them on my chart here. And this goes back from 2018 to present. I'm seeing an increase in PV principally, but a sharper increase in furnace heat pump systems. And just to give you some numbers on that, last year, well, let me go back to 2019 because 2020 is always kind of questionable for data. So 2018 we had 22 permits. Again, this is for the furnace heat pump system. 2019 we had 53. 2020 we had 21. And this year through September we've got 110.
Wow. Okay, and how about EV charging settings?
Right. Let me take a look at the data here. That's actually dipping, it looks like, from a high in 2018 from 114 permits to 75 through September this year.
Interesting. Okay. So in that scaling of the electrification, the plan that you've set forth, do you have numbers that you're using or a range of expected demand in each of those categories in future years? And is the plan that you're setting in place aligned with that expected increase in demand?
No, that's a great question. And I don't know what that demand, I don't know what to expect for that demand. And so this is an area where I think there's some, continued conversation that we need to have with stakeholders and also our utilities operations to understand what that target is that we're shooting for. I think, and maybe somebody on the call can answer this, I've heard that we're trying to get to somewhere around 3,000 permits, on something or, related to electrification. That's an enormous increase in order to achieve our goal. Brad, I don't know if anybody has some insight into that.
Jonathan Option, I can speak to that. So we've done some early projections for the next few years of what increases we might be able to see from voluntary programs, which is in the 200 to 300 projects per year range. And longer term, we have some projections, some high level projections based around the impact analysis. I think the 2,000 to 3,000 per year number comes from just a straight line division of the number of single family homes we have by the number of years we have to achieve the goals, but it gives an order of magnitude estimate. But there's going to have to be staff time devoted to really analyzing this issue, making the projections and figuring out what sorts of business processes could actually handle that volume. And it's going to require some resources, and I'll speak to that when we get to that section.
Okay, so it sounds like for the next couple of years, we've got a more modest projection. And then beyond that, we've got to have a means that would scale the program perhaps an order of magnitude greater. Okay, and then Director Late, you also, in your discussion about readiness, spoke about not only readiness in the household or at the point of use, but also transformer capacity and other system-related capacities. To what extent are we currently needing to hold up permitting to be able to determine that capacity when we get different panel upgrade needs and different, either on the residential or the commercial side. Is that currently an added part of the whole cycle time in a certain number of cases?
Yeah, so and I'll ask David Chung to help me out here, but also maybe Tegan Singh if I get this wrong. But anytime there's a panel, so when we talk about, I think for the purpose of this conversation, we're talking about electrification, we're talking about these, the heat pumps and the chargers and things of this nature. So whenever a system, the building cannot support the additional electrical load, it requires an upgrade, and that process of getting that service panel upgrade requires the permit application to be filed, reviewed by our staff, and then either authorized or identify what needs to happen to make that take place. So anytime we need to do that level of review, that is going to slow down the process, just necessarily because you need a human to look at the record and see what's going on, and also go out in the field and disconnect the service, and then they make they install the new panel, and then you have to reconnect the service. So all of that process takes time, and so that's one part of it. And then there's another part related to solar PVs, which I mentioned we're having ongoing conversations on, to the extent that we're not talking about service panel upgrades and just project review. That's something that we're looking at. But does that answer your question about the service panels?
Well,
and
also about transformer capacity.
Yeah, so the transformer is the one where I've made reference to our ongoing conversations and our limit at 10 kW right now. That's sort of our imposed threshold. If we can raise that threshold to at least the 38K supported by Solar App Plus, we're going to be able to open the door to a higher number of applications than we do now. But that's where utilities, and again, I don't want to speak for utilities. There's a lot involved in this. This is not my area of expertise, so I would invite somebody to join the conversation on that. But I know that there's been a lot of concerted conversations and discussion about that. So I don't know, Tom or someone from utilities want to offer some perspective on that.
Okay, yeah, so I'll jump in. This is Tom Marshall, Assistant Director of Utilities. So transformer upgrades, the issue with those, and it's not just the transformers, it's also the secondary systems that are feeding the transformers as well. So a single home probably doesn't have a lot of impact, but as you get more and more of these coming on, and they become, maybe adjacent to each other or adjacent households, it begins pushing the loads up. And then you got to start worrying about rebuilding the secondary systems and the transformers. So I think in the early years, there's going to be less of that going on just because there's enough capacity out there in the system today. But as we move forward and the program begins escalating, you're going to see those impacts now begin to build up, which is going to result in could be extensive system rebuilds as we move forward. So the reason why the reviews have to take place is we need to look at the system out there and make sure we don't overstress the systems today. So I guess I can't really give you a good answer right now because it's sort of dependent on the impact of the program and how fast it moves along. It has more and more impacts on the utility when that happens, and whether we have staffing or the ability actually you can do that kind of review and all the infrastructure work that comes with it.
Okay, thank you. So that helps. It sounds like in the nearer term, we're not facing a major barrier there, but that similar to the scaling on the permitting, if we're anticipating that we're going to scale this whole program up, then it sounds like we need to have both a plan that is ahead of the curve, and to do that, you're going to need staffing to be able to develop that plan. Does that sound correct?
That's correct, and I wouldn't say it's not having impact today. It does have an impact. It's taking away from some of the other things we have. It's just not, I don't believe it's a critical impact, but it is slowing down other projects as we take on this work. But I think you're absolutely 100% on when you're saying, yeah, it's an issue about staffing, and it's probably something we have to get ahead of earlier rather than later. So I guess what I would advocate, we would need to be looking at doing some of this building in advance of these programs coming out. Otherwise, we're going to slow the process of converting over considerably if we have to rebuild these systems as these applications are coming in. We're going to have to get ahead of that if it's going to run out smoothly.
Okay,
If
and
I could add also,
Yeah.
Vice Mayor, I think just to connect a couple of dots here with what Tom just responded with the earlier discussion. The other immediate impact that we are feeling at the moment is the cycle time on processing permit applications for, in this case, the homeowner who wants to install the electrification system, whether it be simple PV to more elaborate, to the extent that it is triggering that additional analysis. So just want to make sure those dots are connected. And also on the planning side, I will just perhaps daylight the immediate next step that we have been discussing with the ad hoc offline, which is to do a workshop that would specifically focus on this question of scaling our electrification turnaround. So that's a teaser for folks who are watching. Thanks.
Great, thanks for that clarification. And what, off of what Director Marshall had said, I heard that even in the near term, the utilities staffing is responding to these needs, but sometimes at the expense of other initiatives or priorities. And if that is the case, then I want to make sure that the council really understands those conflicts, and even in the near term, that we may have inadequate staffing to do the range of measures that we're trying to do now, and certainly inadequate to do what we're projecting is needed going forward. And
if I could pick up on that, I'll say opening, I would also reflect on not too distant example that the council saw, where a replacement of an underground district infrastructure at a neighborhood scale, which quite frankly is exactly the type of proactive work that our utility would like to do in order to get ahead of the capacity curve on a proactive scale, neighborhood scale level, did encounter concern and quite frankly controversy about the move to above ground transformers versus existing underground transformers, recognizing the additional capacity as well as a number of other issues that came into play. So that's a great example of the kind of work that has been moving forward, but again has, for understandable reasons, encountered some difficulties itself. So just one example of the kinds of conflicts and ultimately some decisions ahead for us on how to approach this strategically.
Well, thanks for that. And I think that example is a really good one, and that kind of issue is part of what we need to bring back to the council for them to really understand the barriers and the tensions between policies that they've adopted and what stands in between that and the full implementation of those policies. So I really encourage staff to bring forward both these kinds of tensions on different values that on, for instance, the undergrounding and issues, as well as the disconnect between our current staffing and our future staffing needs versus the work plan that's necessary to achieve our policy goals. So please bring that information forward so that we can come face to face with it and struggle with it and figure out what to do. Lastly, Director Late, if I don't want to bog down the meeting today, but I think you alluded to some metrics that you have on kind of the implementation plan that you have on the streamlining, on what's been accomplished to date, and then what you have projected. And I think that that's something that would be helpful for us to be able to get some of that data. And I think it even at the council level, again, is something that the community would benefit from understanding what that plan is and where we are on that path, and that it's not a flip of a switch to accomplish it all at once, but that there is both a plan and there are milestones that have already been achieved and others on the horizon, and so that we have a better understanding of that.
Great, thank you. I'm happy to provide that information.
Thanks. And that's good for me. Thanks.
Okay, well, let's keep moving into the next section of the presentation on resources. And I'll turn to Utilities Assistant Director, Jonathan Aubenschein.
You're muted, John.
Thank you. Good morning, council members and members of the community. I'm the Assistant Director for Utilities Resource Management, Jonathan Aubenschein, and I'll be talking, so I'm leading our implementation and analytical teams for the SCAP, and I wanted to give you a high-level overview of what implementation efforts are already underway and the resources we're devoting to them. I also want to talk about some potential areas where we see a need for additional resources, potentially, as well as potential funding sources that could be used to fund near-term SCAP goals. I think as Jonathan alluded to earlier, I think there's a lot of really good discussion on this concept. I think it helps to think about there being an earlier and a later phase for the SCAP in terms of programs as well, not just permitting. In the earlier phase, we're looking at a level of participation on the order of 200 to 300 per year, which needs to scale up by an order of magnitude through additional policies later on. What we're trying to do in this early phase is develop voluntary programs and incentives that can support those later policies. So, expanding the services that are available to residents, doing pilots of mobility programs, and the goal there is if we develop those high quality programs, services, and incentives for residents, even if they're voluntary at first, it can be especially if we end up with good customer experience from those efforts, it can be a really critical foundation if we're considering things like mandates, carbon pricing, block by block electrification, or any other policy to accelerate and scale up electrification in the future. We have a number of programs and projects underway already, and we're doing what we can with our existing resources. These only represent a portion of what we need to do to help the community achieve 80 by 30, and that includes even in this early period. This isn't going to even achieve, these programs that we're doing with existing resources aren't even sufficient necessarily to achieve the 200 to 300 permits we're talking about per year, but we are working on some programs with existing resources. So for example, we're in the process of doing an RFP right now, and we're looking for those opportunities where we can dovetail with existing programs. So for example, we're doing an RFP right now to renew our residential efficiency programs, and that includes low-income residents. We already offer a home electrification evaluation with our home efficiency Genie program, but we're taking the opportunity of this RFP to look for ways to expand the programs to include stronger electrification services like technical assistance, contractor vetting, or turnkey installation services. We're engaged in similar efforts to expand our existing programs for multifamily vehicle charging, and also to establish some non-residential electrification programs and incentives. A lot of these programs can be established with existing staffing and funding, but there isn't enough funding to actually achieve the level of participation we need short term. There's a need for more extensive outreach and marketing if we want to see heightened participation, as well as additional funding to accommodate the program services and incentives associated with that increased participation. And I think really importantly, and there was a lot of good conversation on this in the previous section, there are these potential city operational bottlenecks that also have to be addressed as well, where resources are needed to be able to accommodate those increased permitting activities. We have roughly 12 FTE across the city currently devoted to SCAP programs in FY 2022. It's not all focused on electrification. There's a lot on mobility and sustainability. But this is a really big effort, and those FTE are not enough to be able to move forward with all the programs in the April 19th council motion. We have some programs that we're working on, but that are moving more slowly due to limited capacity. For example, we have the micromobility program that our Office of Transportation is working on to pilot shared e-bikes and e-scooters in Palo Alto. We have funding for that, but it's not moving forward because of limited staff capacity. The Office of Transportation is really focused on the South Palo Alto Bikeways project and the on-demand transit pilot. So, the staff capacity isn't there to move it forward. Limited management capacity is also an issue. This is an enormous effort, and the same managers are working across, working with this engagement process, managing other engagement and outreach efforts, managing implementation while also handling regular responsibilities, and that can result in bottlenecks as well. Next slide, please. I'd say the biggest challenges we're facing are, again, in city operations, and we had a really good discussion of this in the last section, so I won't spend too much time on this slide, but I really did want to highlight this. I think there are really three major ways that city operations end up being affected by the SCAP. And first off, there are a lot of new technologies and new business processes and new sustainability efforts that are driving the need for more and more staff time, experienced staff time on evaluating technologies, developing new business processes, developing policies. And when that's combined with other changes in the industry around things like, ADUs, for example, with PDS, with planning and development services, the rate of change and new things that need to be evaluated is beginning to exceed experienced staff's capacity to handle them. The second impact that the SCAP can have is those additional permit volumes. And we had a really good discussion about that in the last section. Even an increase, of 200 to 300 permits can impact existing work and have other sort of knock-on effects. And then that leads to the third way that the SCAP's impacting operations, which is trying to figure out how to plan for those, that order of magnitude increase of, let's say 2,000 to 3,000 electrification projects per year to achieve 80 by 30. And of course, that would impact permitting operations in really unprecedented ways, and staff time needs to be devoted to actually working on that planning effort over the next few years. And then I will say that even if funding and positions were made available to work on these three issues, there are some other challenges that could stall progress. It's not just about actually providing the resources. Several city operational departments, and I'll really highlight utilities, operations and engineering here, have experienced recruitment and retention issues, but it goes even beyond those departments. It means it can be hard to fill even available positions, or sometimes even to find contractors to do the work in some cases. It can be so acute, I think, that it as Vice Mayor Burt noted, that it can affect the ability to keep up with routine infrastructure maintenance and replacement. Where we are able to bring on new staff, we are bringing on less experienced staff who need training and time to grow, and this can lower productivity in the short term while people are developing. And that can be a challenge in engaging on these types of SCAP issues as well. So we're working on a variety of strategies, and we have representatives from, we have representatives from PDS and utilities to speak to these. We're working on strategies to keep regular work in progress while still making progress on the SCAP, trying to work with contractors, put apprenticeship and training programs in place, for example. But we need continuing support for these efforts and more support for these efforts to really make them effective. So this is a really, really critical area. Can we get the next slide, please? The other thing that the SCAP team needs to be focused on is, in parallel with launching voluntary programs and addressing city operational impacts and thinking through what city operations look like at scale if the SCAP is this transition is really happening at the high rate of change we want to get it to. There's also planning that needs to be done on how to actually get to that high rate of change in the first place. There are, what policies or mandates or pricing signals or, systematic block by block plans need to be put in place, and what are the legalities, the logistics, the funding needs of those sorts of efforts. That takes time to evaluate. Large funding sources need to be identified. I mean, we're talking about something that's on the order of $750 million, this transformation. We also have other studies that need to be done, looking at issues like carbon neutrality goals, identifying the additional emissions reductions that could help us achieve 80 by 30. You remember we only identified 71% reductions from 1990 levels. We still have another 9% we need to identify. And all of these studies have to happen in parallel with everything else that I was talking about around engagement, adoption, and addressing city operations impacts. So there's a resource need there. It is, I think, easy to let that planning effort slip, but I think that creates the possibility of missing some critical opportunities, like opportunities to put ballot measures in front of the voters in 2024, if that were something, a direction that the community wanted to move towards around funding or policies to accelerate electrification. There's a lot of pre-planning that has to go into that. Next slide, please. All right, so everything I talked about in the previous 3 slides do require resources, but there are funding sources available as well. And we've listed a bunch of these here. Some of these are funding sources available, and some of these are ideas that have been put forth that we can look at and evaluate. Some of the funding sources on this slide, especially low carbon fuel standard revenues, and I'll just say all of these funding sources relate to one or another statewide program, whether it's a grant program or the cap and trade program or the low carbon fuel standard program, or mandates to fund things like energy efficiency. Many of these are related to statewide programs that are already in operation that we're already participating in. And so some of these funding sources, one of these funding sources is the low carbon fuel standard program, and we're already using some of those funds, for example, to promote EV charging programs. Other funding sources, and I'll point especially to certain cap and trade program revenues, have accumulated reserves that are available to the city to launch programs right now. Once we're ready to actually designate what we want to spend money on. Several of these funding sources are from programs that continue to generate new revenue every year, which allows for the funding of ongoing programs, not just one-time spending. But every funding source does have its limitations, and we're in discussions with the Attorney's Office to work out which programs can be funded using which funding sources. And that's something we're working on urgently right now. Another topic, so more broadly, we're also thinking through what other types of potential new funding sources could be out there that we don't yet have access to. This could include approaches like starting a voluntary green program, or other potential approaches like ballot measures or rate increases specifically to fund certain programs. All of those ideas, some require significant staff resources, others require community buy-in or have other sorts of impacts. And so they require some buy-in before we can move forward with them. So that's my overview. I wanted to give you at least a high-level view of our resource and funding assessment, and I'm happy to take any questions.
So,
Um,
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I'm just going to wrap this up, then we can take questions.
Sorry, Christina.
That's okay, which is that we've spent 2 SCAP ad hoc meetings discussing building electrification. Last month we focused on residential, and today we focused on non-residential and permitting. And for the next 2 SCAP ad hoc meetings, we'll focus on transportation, specifically electric vehicles and mobility. And please note that we've changed the November date. It was originally scheduled for November 11th, but since that is Veterans Day, we've bumped that up a week to November 4th. And also wanted to let you all know that in addition to your feedback today, we have launched a new survey to ask for your feedback on all 7 of the areas of the SCAP update. And that survey is available in Open Town Hall. And I can put that link in the chat so that you can access it. And now we can take questions.
Yes, and thank you, Christine. I think we've discussed it at this point. Let's see, it's 11 o'clock. We've got a half hour left. I think we wanted to have a chance for some public comment before turning back to the committee. So why don't we do that? We'll see how much we have time for. But if you would like to make some comments, please raise your hand and let's see how many potential speakers we have. I'm not seeing anyone raising their hand just yet. Oh,
looks like we do have one, Brad.
okay. So let's get started. And I think if it's okay with the committee, what we'll do is maybe go as late as 11:20 if we have speakers, and then turn it back to the committee. Okay.
So Ken Kirshner, I promoted you to panelist, so you should be able to talk. Ken, are you able to present?
Yeah, thanks. I actually don't have a presentation. I just wanted to thank the ad hoc group here for the initiatives. I think this process is unfolding in a really beneficial way for the community. And I wanted to take a minute just to advocate for an additional concept, the Palo Alto community microgrid. This is it's not related directly to transportation or to residential or commercial buildings. So in essence, the concept is to create an umbrella around the solar and local generation in the South Palo Alto community building area that would offer resiliency, cheap local generation, as well as an environmental benefit. So kind of the trifecta for electrification and climate change that would include potential municipal buildings like Firehouse 4, as well as the Mitchell Park complex and the surrounding schools and many others. So I'd like to advocate for this and see if there's a place in the future agendas where it would be appropriate to go into more detail on this. I'll stop there. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Ken, for your comment. Our next speaker is Arthur Keller.
Thank you. First of all, I appreciate all the work you're doing, but I have a question. And the question is, when are we going to get a second supply line into the city for electricity? We have a line already, and South Palo Alto it isn't activated because PG&E won't activate it. It goes right over the new bridge, the bridge over 101. That's why the bridge has to be a funny shape. Secondly, the second issue is that when we get half of the people who can get off solar, can get off gas, what happens to people who left on gasoline? Natural gas. What happens to those people who are forced to keep natural gas because they don't have the funds to do it when the people who can get off it do? Thank you.
Thank you, Arthur. Our next one is David Cole. I just promoted you to panelist. David, can you unmute yourself?
Yes, thank you very much. Thanks for all the great work, and especially Jonathan's work on all the analysis. It seems that a price on carbon would help move all aspects of this forward. What is the city looking at in terms of trying to account for the true price of carbon emissions, whether it be in our utilities or natural gas or other issues like that? What's being done in that area? Thank you.
Great, thank you. I'm not seeing any other hands at this point in time. Oh, hold on, I've got a couple more hands. Debbie Mytels, and then after that, Bob Winslow. Debbie, I'm promoting you to panelist. Debbie, are you able to unmute yourself? Debbie, are you there?
Oh, sorry. Okay. Thanks so much for the presentations. I learned a lot this morning, especially thinking about all the complications of the non-residential situations. I think you guys are all doing a great job of analyzing it. One of the things that came out for me in listening to Jonathan's presentation about the resource issues has to do with, some of the things we might think about sharing our resources and working together with some of the community choice energy agencies like Peninsula Clean Energy, Silicon Valley Clean Energy, et cetera. Especially looking at things like evaluating new technology and analyzing best practices on business processes. We're a small city after all, and we could combine with those agencies to create a whole peninsula-wide organization, or at least through some kind of collaborative project to do some of those types of work that might reduce our staffing load and help us be more in sync with the nearby other agencies. And of course, you did talk about possibly doing training with them of contractors, and I think that would be a good start. But let's think about what we can do to partner with others nearby without losing our own individuality, of course, but just something to think about. Thanks.
Thanks, Debbie. Our next speaker is Bob Winslow. Following that will be Jocelyn Levy.
Yeah, I'll be very quick as well. I thought the presentation was incredibly educational and practical. What it led me to be thinking or just wanting to maintain was that ultimately the SCAP is a measure of climate impact. And if we're going to be discovering that the organizational challenges are going to be causing us to lag on our SCAP progress, I've ended up, as you know, being really interested in alternate drawdown approaches or offset approaches. And I think that the city, when it lags on achieving the transformation, say, to electrification, should always consider the investment and the relatively quick return of offsets so that we can achieve the goals that the community set for itself. The second point was, again, just trying to consider ways that can break the, if you will, some of the infrastructure, or not infrastructure, but organizational challenges. And I have been wondering about, again, working more closely with the Chamber of Commerce so that the business community's capacity can be brought into this, because it sounds like 12 FTEs in a city trying to lift up this entire transformation is just ultimately not viable, and we need to enlarge our base. And I think other commenters spoke to that. But again, I'm blessed to live in this city. It sounds like we're all working really hard on it, and there's no criticism. Thanks.
Thanks, Bob. Next speaker is Jocelyn Levy, and I'm not seeing any more hands. If people want to present, please raise your hand.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Just thank you for your efforts. So I'll put in my thanks for that as well. And this is a question that I haven't really seen addressed, which is that we're looking at scaling about 300 homes or customers a year and up to 3,000. And I'm wondering when waste management gets pulled into this, because this seems like a lot of equipment that's going to be coming offline and that's going to need to be repurposed or recycled in some way. So I want to make sure that there's a view to what happens when all of these changes are made. And that's it.
Great, thank you. I'm not seeing any more hands, Brad.
Okay, well, thanks to all the commenters, and let's turn it back to the committee.
Okay, so Mr. Abendschein, thank you for your presentation. I was expecting more about what staff needs from us now to do all the stuff that needs to be done. So let me double click on your very nuanced statement that more support is needed for staff and recruitment and retention. Can you be more clear about what it is you need from us to get this going?
Yes, I think one of the challenges we had preparing for this meeting is that there's some really active internal discussions that really aren't ready for public discussion yet on both that topic and the real specifics of what resources are needed and what resources we want to move forward with. And I think some of that is informed in part by the need to get feedback on some of the goals that the community has for us to actually implement as well. But I'll defer also to Director Eggleston and City Manager Shikata on this as well.
Sounds like maybe staff is still in the idea generation stage.
I think
of what it is you need from us. Are you still unclear on what it is that needs to be done?
I would say
sorry to be so direct, but
it's okay.
Yeah.
I would say we're past the idea generation phase in the vast majority of areas, but we're in internal discussions right now. We really haven't run all of these ideas by our senior management teams yet. So that's where the active discussions take place, and they're not quite ready for public consumption yet.
I see our senior management team has arrived on the scene.
Well, if I could just add a perspective to Jonathan's, I think the discussion this morning is really at the heart of the matter. We've got the parallel, I'll say, challenge of running our existing production as it relates to issuance of permits, and really responsive to applications, while also simultaneously through this effort, really trying to make the decision on where do we focus as it relates to the next phase. And so let me be honest and say Jonathan has proposed a staffing up plan that is pretty significant over the next couple of years. I do suspect, or more than that, I believe that the council will need to weigh in on the strategy for how that the plan should unfold before we're in a position to say, yes, this is the right level of staffing and type of staffing and departments that the staffing should go into as the way to deal with the challenge on the horizon. Let's say if we pick that horizon of a couple years out. So really does need to connect the dots between this discussion and what additional resources are necessary. But the conversation we're having right now on how our current programs are being implemented is as really time critical from our perspective as anything else.
Okay, so I'll just restate what I heard from Mr. Abendschein as well. The rate of change is beginning to exceed staff's capacity to absorb and implement. And that's not a reflection on our capable staff. That's a reflection on the fact that they are, running this plane all day, every day, and the headwinds we've got, which are both the pandemic and financial problems, right? And we're trying to do business completely differently, and it feels like a crisis, another crisis. So I'm glad we're getting to the point where we're going to talk about what is it going to take to implement this plan in the next 2-3 years, right? I think we all have a good sense of like, okay, here are our pilot projects that are voluntary and they're all custom and they all have their custom sources, and that takes a lot of time. It's labor intensive, and we know where we want to be, and it's that middle part where we're going to need the staff to help us get the community where it needs to be. So I don't know where we're going to find the funding for this, but that's part of the community discussion. And so thank you for sharing a little bit more information. I think it's important for the advocates who are on this call, and for my colleague and myself to figure out how to explain this to the rest of our colleagues and the community.
Well, thanks. Just following up on Councilmember Cormack's questions and comments on the staffing needs and ultimately how we would fund both the staffing and other programmatic needs. I fully recognize that we have a significant disconnect, and it's not quite clear to the council and the community how much of a disconnect we have between the objectives we've adopted and the staffing that we have compared to what would be necessary to actually implement those programs. And so I think the sooner that we get a phase of that discussion, the better. And I think that it's, as I'm kind of digesting this in real time, I think it's important to get the issue out there before you have the details out there, so that we begin to get the council and the community to understand what's coming forward. And then when the specifics come out on needs, and this may be along the lines of what you're already planning to do, to look at our most immediate needs in one bucket, and with greater visibility that we'd have on what those are. And then as we move outward toward medium and longer term needs, you're going to have less clarity, but you'll probably have some clarity on that you'll need at least X, and you may in fact need Y to achieve what you're aiming for. And to try to frame it as well as we can that way, but the sooner that we start priming the pump with providing the staffing for the most immediate needs, the better. And then on the funding side, there's actually the Palo Alto Green equivalent program was mentioned just very briefly at the end of the presentation, but that's a program that I think could provide resources sooner rather than later. It was explicitly part of the council motion from February, and we're in October and we haven't had any information on the former program, and so that we can begin to have a discussion on both whether a new program would be appropriate and what that might be able to achieve. So I'd like to have that an update, because we don't have time in this meeting, even though it was, I had thought it was going to be a significant part of the funding discussion today. I'd like to get that on the next meeting and make sure that we have kind of review of the former program. It had different objectives, but a lot of parallels to what we might do going forward, and make sure that we have information on what level of participation there was in the community at that time. I suspect that we'd have an even stronger participation today, but we were the highest in the country by far among equivalent programs. And then how much that surcharge, that voluntary surcharge that people agreed to have on their electric bills to basically have offsets at the time for non-renewable electricity. And what were the dollars that we generated from that program? So those are things that I'd really like to see in the upcoming meeting. And then The other thing that I think we need to look at is when we will return to council and what subjects we need to both update the council on and seek their affirmation on the directions that we want to pursue. And City Manager Shikata, do we have a tentative scheduling of an update on the SCAP in the next month or two to the council?
I believe we've been penciling a mid-November update to the council, but again, that's somewhat subject to discussions here and when you feel that it's appropriate to be able to report out.
Great. That sounds good. I also wanted to echo what Debbie Mytels brought up on how we might leverage resources through collaborations with the community choice aggregators that are in the surrounding communities. Certainly, it's not going to be on every aspect of what we're going to do, but it does seem that there are some aspects that lend themselves to us doing joint efforts with them. And it's part of kind of the broader issue of not just how do we have more resources out of our own local funding, but how do we leverage resources? Staff has spoken about the grants, and I'm interested in really what going forward grant opportunities there may be. I also wanted to touch on what Bob Winslow mentioned on where this aggressive program that we have gets us to approximately 71% reduction by 2030 if we achieved all of those objectives. And how we get to 80% and then how we get beyond that are really challenging questions. But the drawdown component is one that I think we need to include as we're really looking at that 2030 goal. And in addition to offsets that are meaningful offsets outside of the region, we should be looking at technologies that are potentially within state or even within the city that are not necessarily immediately available, but emerging rapidly. This segment of climate protection, of how do we remove and draw down carbon through both natural and technological means, is rapidly evolving. And I expect in the next very few years, it'll be a major part of climate protection programs. And so I want to make sure we're beginning at least to look at options in those areas. They're not ones that we can move on immediately, but part of this committee purpose is to be looking strategically beyond just all the pressing issues that we have right in front of us. So those are, I think, my key questions and comments. Thanks again for a really informative set of presentations. I think we're really starting to get ahead of steam and on getting into the nitty-gritty of all the elements and aspects of the challenges we face in moving forward, and sooner we face up to them, the sooner we can solve a good portion of them. Maybe not all of them, but a good portion. So thanks again for some really valuable presentations, and thanks again for, we had another great attendance by the public, and folks, maybe staff could refresh the public on the ways that they can provide additional comments and input to us, both on this meeting and going forward, and look forward to November 4th.
All right, thank you. Well, it looks like we're about at the end. To the point of comments, sustainability@cityofpaloalto.org is always one way to provide comments. In the presentation, we talked about the open town hall survey. So I think we'll be sending something out to all the attendees of the meeting, and we'll include the link to that We'd love your input through that survey. And just again, to echo the Vice Mayor, thanks to our ad hoc committee, all the mini staff who participated in this session, all the attendees, and especially the public commenters. Great meeting, and looking forward to more. Thank you.
Thank you.